The morning of Saturday the 27th of April greeted me with the fantastic news that brave little Hunter was finally free from a tidal lagoon that had been her unintentional home for 4 weeks. After many hours of tireless work, both physically and in planning the huge task of her rescue, after the heartache of watching her grieve the death of her mother and the frustration of failed rescue attempts, the rescuers watched on as this amazing young orca made her own way out of the lagoon that she had been trapped in and into Espinosa Inlet. As you can see, she had to pass under a bridge where the depth of water is very shallow and the area of water to swim in is very narrow. But at around 2:30 a.m. Friday morning, at high tide, in very calm, glassy waters, she did it. That evening she had been seen breaching and tail slapping. I have seen a little video of it. It's remarkable. And the romantic part of me wonders if she knew that this was the last night she was spending in the lagoon and that she was going to be heading back out into the ocean to find her family. That night, federal fisheries officers and members of the Atisut First Nation had been feeding her chunks of seal meat, gradually leading her towards the narrow gap, and at some point she made it through. But no one knew for sure until she was spotted heading down Espinosa Inlet towards Esperanza Inlet and the open ocean. She was not alone. She was being followed by a boat which has a marine mammal rescue team on board, keeping an eye on her progress. Like many people around the world, her story had captured my heart, and I had been following it avidly. So what were the events that led to her being trapped in a lagoon off the west coast of Vancouver Island in the first place? Well, on Saturday, March the 23rd, a big female orca known as Spong was found stranded in Little Espinosa Inlet, and unfortunately, in spite of attempts to help her, she tragically died. Big orcas feed on mammals, and it is thought that Spong became stranded after an attempt at capturing a harbour seal whose remains were found close by. Big orcas are known to launch their bodies ashore to capture their prey and then wriggle themselves back into deeper water. Unfortunately, Spong became trapped in a trough-like depression and was unable to get out. Members of the Hattusut First Nation were present at the scene and draped her body with cedar boughs and performed a ceremony to release her spirit. Just to add to the tragedy, a necropsy was undertaken on Spong and she was found to be pregnant. Sadly, the tragedy did not end there. She had her 2-year-old daughter with her, who, understandably, became very confused. She kept circling the water near her mother and making anguished cries. The calf was named Brave Little Hunter and was now trapped alone in the lagoon where her mother died. A rescue team made up of the Ihatusat and Chatlat First Nations and federal marine officials tried to lure her out of the lagoon, but the distressed calf was not interested. It was only possible for her to pass through the shallow, narrow gap when the tide was at its highest and the current was at its lowest, giving a window of opportunity of around 30 minutes a day. In a bid to encourage her through the gap, sounds of her great aunt were played underwater, but to no avail. Volunteers from the first 2 nations took canoes out in the hope of guiding her out of the lagoon while beating drums, but this did not work either. 2 weeks later, the calf was still in the lagoon, but doing well, all things considered. There were attempts to provide her with food, but it was unclear as to whether Brave Little Hunter had eaten any of it. It did, however, look as though she was hunting birds, so she did seem able to feed herself, and at that time she showed no signs of being emaciated. Her skin was starting to slough off in large patches along the top of her head and the base of her dorsal fin on each side, which was probably due to the freshwater runoff into the lagoon. Her health was being closely monitored, both visually and acoustically, by many experts, including vets and drone operators. She was observed making deep dives, which regularly exceeded aerobic dive limits. She seemed particularly interested in the drone and would turn on her side to peer up at it. She also made calls in bouts, every 10 to 15 minutes or so. It was believed that she was calling for her family, but due to the isolated location of the lagoon, they couldn't hear her, which was just heartbreaking. As she could not be herded out of the lagoon, a plan to move the calf by helicopter was considered, but it was thought that this would be too stressful for her, so the plan changed. And she was going to be lured using seine nets into an area where she could be placed into a sling, where she could then be moved onto a truck, and then driven to an area outside of the lagoon, and then placed onto a boat. She would then be placed in a net pen, which is used for salmon fishing, where she could remain until her family passed by. To cause the least amount of stress for the young dolphin, the plan needed to go like clockwork, and could not last more than a few hours. However, on Friday the 12th of April, the rescue had to be abandoned after a number of attempts were made to encourage her into the shallow end of the lagoon. She wasn't interested in doing that and managed to evade each attempt and returned to the area where she had been hanging out. The team of rescuers were having to rethink their plan. Luckily, she was still in good health despite her skin condition. At this time, her family, which includes her grandmother, was spotted swimming near Vancouver Island. For her to survive out in the open ocean, it is imperative that she is reunited with them. At 2 years of age, she is still too young to look after herself and needs the support of her family. Another rescue was planned on Friday the 19th of April, but was postponed after she was seen to eat 18 kilograms of seal meat. The rescue team saw this as an opportunity to lure her out of the lagoon with food, which is a better option given the risks involved to her and the rescue team in trying to capture her. And in the end, it is this strategy that worked. The challenge is now for her to be reunited with her family. So who is out there, hopefully, waiting for her return? Well, Brave Little Hunter belongs to a pod of orcas known as the Runaways, and coastal First Nations and whale-watching companies are on the lookout for the pod. It is hoped that as Brave Little Hunter heads out into the open ocean, she will be able to meet up with them. The family ties of big orcas are not as strong as resident orcas, and it is possible that Brave Little Hunter could be adopted into another pod if she cannot find her own pod. She definitely needs to find someone to look after her. Big orcas don't usually leave their mother until they are 5 to 12 years of age. Like resident orcas, big orcas are matriarchal, and their pods are centred around mothers or grandmothers in matrilines. These matrilines average about 3 to 7 individuals, making hunting and prey sharing as optimum as possible. To keep the matrilines small, female orcas will break away to form their own pods once they have started to have their own calves. The general rule is that the firstborn male gets to stay with their mum. Spong, Brave Little Hunter's mother, was given the identification T109A3. She was the daughter of T109A, a female called Frio, who was born in 1990 and who is the matriarch of this pod. The pod consists of 11 individuals, which is large for a big orca pod. Within that pod she has her grandmother, aunts and uncles, and a selection of cousins. She will be so loved and cared for if they can only be reunited. She also has a great-grandmother, still alive, called Big Mama, who is matriarch to a pod of 4 orcas. And she also has extended family, all originally from Big Mama's matriline, in 2 other pods. Big orcas are known to be accepted into other pods other than the one they are born into. Brave Little Hunter's pod has an individual who travels with them, but was not born into the pod. So there is also hope that if she can't find her own pod, she may well be adopted into another. The other hopeful thing is that extended families and other matrilines often meet up to socialise or breed, and even travel together. When this occurs, it has been observed that calves will play together and mothers will spend time together. It's basically a big family reunion. Some individuals have been known to break away from their mother to spend some time with their aunts and cousins and return to their mother later on, a bit like having a little vacation with the relatives. So there is every hope that she will be adopted by a pod, only later to find her grandmother. So as the world waits with bated breath as to where the brave little hunter finds her family, there is real hope that she will indeed find a pod that will care for her, if not her own. She has gone through so much, shown so much strength and resilience at the loss of her mother and being trapped in the lagoon, that surely she will endure and live long and prosper. And I hope to continue her story with you and report a happy ending. If you have enjoyed this video, then please like, subscribe and share with your like-minded friends.